Good morning, everybody. For those of you who are just joining us, we are coming together as a collective this morning to have a conversation around drinking in the workplace and some of the different thoughts, thinking around it all. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by three other amazing people this morning, who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves individually in a second. But I guess the big and most powerful thing for me is that we're coming together as a collective this morning from different organisations, looking at things in slightly different ways, but with a joined up want, vision and a mission of trying to help other people. And I think that is the key thing that I would like as many people to take away from today. We're not trying to tell anybody what to do, but we're trying to help guide people and trying to be thought-provoking as to what businesses can do to support people, what individuals can do to support people, and to take some of our lived experience, joined up experience, learnt experiences, and to hopefully help those, use those as we go forward. So I am going to start with Alice. Please, will you put your hand up, wave to everybody, and it's like what's your name and where'd you come from, isn't it?
Hi everyone. Yes, thanks Alex. So yeah, my name's Alice. I am the founder and CEO of 𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗂𝗂 Suicide Prevention Charity. It was set up about 4 years ago now in memory of my brother Josh, who we lost on the 25th of November 2020. And our technology really is there to support people in their moments of crisis, and that includes people who might be finding things difficult and have a difficult relationship with alcohol.
Yeah, such an amazing thing, and as we know that whether it's alcohol, mental health, everything has that huge ripple effect, because it doesn't just affect the one individual, it affects children, families, loved ones, work colleagues, and yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing what you're doing and what you've created, and you should be super proud of yourself, because we all are.
Thanks,
Susan, over to you. We've done stuff before. It's a pleasure, being on with you again this morning. So please, I'm going to ask you, what's your name and where'd you come from?
Thank you, Alex, and thanks for having me here, inviting me here. Yeah, I'm Susan Laurie, and I work for Alcohol Change UK. I'm their consultancy and training manager, but I'm also their expert by experience. I would say that the drinking culture in the industry I was in many years ago had a huge negative impact on me. But one of the reasons I'm here and why I'm very proud to be here is the work I do with Alcohol Change UK, who are working towards reducing the harms of alcohol, and alcohol in the workplace is part of that work that we do. We run seminars and webinars for employees to educate people about alcohol. We train line managers about spotting the signs. We help with policy, and the work that we do is so important. And in fact, the workplace we've chosen as our theme for next week's Alcohol Awareness Week. So I'm absolutely delighted to hear and very, very proud to represent Alcohol Change UK.
Yeah, and you guys as a charity are doing amazing things, and it's shining a light and, trying to, and what I love is that you have the same ethos as Clarity, in that you are not telling anybody not to drink. You are educating, you are basically helping, you're trying to basically, make people sort of think about it and allow them the freedom of choice, as to what they do, because I'm a great believer in and a massive advocate of trying to tell somebody what to do just does not work. Whereas if we can educate, we can showcase, and we can lead, it's a lot more of a powerful way. So yeah, I'm a big fan.
Thanks.
And then finally, the young man who's even washed his beard for us this morning. I found this out. I found this out just a couple of minutes before we went live. That James has even washed his beard for us. So, James,
you're welcome.
Give us a little backstory about you, James, please.
Thanks, Alex. That'll be me oversharing, as I usually do. Yeah, thanks to Alice and everyone for having me here. I'm James. I'm the co-founder of 𝗵𝗺𝗶𝗰𝗶𝗀𝗂𝘀𝗂. But I guess I'm here kind of with multiple hats on, because I'm here from a kind of alcohol-free beer brand that we created to create choice. It wasn't about kind of demonizing alcohol. It was about giving people the choice when they went to the pub that they didn't have to have an incredibly sugary drink or be stuck on mineral water or have something kind of, or have hot drinks. It was about creating a craft option. Since I founded 𝗵𝗺𝗶𝗰𝗲, I was diagnosed as autistic and ADHD in 2023. I spent a long time kind of struggling with my mental health and never really kind of understanding why. And used to use alcohol or have an alcohol dependency, not from an addicting point of view, but from a social coping mechanism point of view, which I think probably a lot of people out there it resonates with. Then a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to get involved with Ripple, and that really struck a chord with me because I'd lost a friend a few years ago, close friend and colleague, to alcohol abuse. And he chose to, through a lack of mental health support, slowly and painfully end his life through alcohol abuse. So there's kind of a lot of different touch points there with it. My dedication to Ripple is not from a brand presence point of view, but from a dedication to the cause and trying to kind of offer people the choice that there are ways around getting around your social awkwardness, especially if you're autistic and ADHD. And me trying to champion that and advocate that, and now and again perhaps mention my beer brand as well.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And what I love is that, again, it's about choice. It's about not telling anybody what to do, but also you made an amazing point that about coping. You mentioned and touched on it about coping, and you think back to everybody always used to associate with, I need alcohol, that Dutch courage. If I'm going to an event, I need to have that Dutch courage. If I'm going to a work event that I don't know anybody, I need that Dutch courage. I need a bit of Dutch courage before I go on a night out. And that was the old perception. That was the old perception because it was what everybody was used to. And I guess that makes me take a step back and say to Alice, obviously, Alice, both of us have come up with something over the last 3-4 years, and we're doing something completely different. And I look at it that we've got the younger generation and we've got the old generation, and we are trying to lead to bring everybody together and to merge the up and coming and the older generation. It's like the old ways, and we're trying to sort of realign everything between us and educate people that we don't always need Dutch courage. We don't always need to keep things to ourselves. We don't always need and I guess it's give me a bit of a reflection on from your own personal experience what the old ways were like in terms of the work culture in the workplace.
Yeah, so I spent my early 20s in the city in London. I moved from my small village on my own to the city, and I didn't know anybody, and work really was my whole life. So when the bosses wanted to go out of an evening, if there was an opportunity for me to meet new people out and about, I would take it. And drink was a central figure as part of that socializing. If we had work meetings, it would be at the pub and it would be with a drink in hand. If we finished work early, it would be at the pub and it would be with a drink in hand. And it was just relentless. So in my early 20s, that was just the way it was. And actually, if you didn't have a drink in your hand, people would think it was strange. they would think you were odd. Why aren't you fun? Why aren't you joining in? What's wrong with you? So there was a big amount of peer pressure there, I think, to keep up with everybody and to hold your own in that environment.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, I think all of us on the call can probably totally relate to how the work culture used to be, and how basically everything used to be centered all around alcohol. You know, whether you were, you know, going for a lunch with colleagues, whether you were going out with clients, whether you were, you know, socializing, everything was very heavily centered around alcohol. And I went to a university on a Friday night a few months back, and you would expect, years gone by, I would have expected that everybody in the university would have been in the pub, and the pub and the bars were empty, but the gym was absolutely chock-a-block. And this was a Friday night at a university, and I thought to myself, how seismic is the shift? How much do we need to start thinking as businesses what the next generation want, what actually the people who are coming through actually think and relate to alcohol compared to the older ways? And I truly believe as a business leader that we need to start embracing that change, because the younger generation, the next generation, are going to be the people who are running the country. They're going to be the people who are running the companies in the next 20 years, 25 years. And, you know, to the point I made before, it's about bringing the gap of the generations together. And I guess, Susan, I'm going to ask you, because Alice touched on a point about if you didn't join in, it wasn't fun. And, you know, there's stigma. There was so much stigma. And I probably still think there is stigma attached to it now.
Yeah, there was absolutely stigma when I was working years ago. Very much like as you've talked about, I used alcohol in the early days at work to give me confidence with my colleagues. I don't know if it was because of my background, my northern background or whatever, but I found that alcohol, or I felt it made me more confident when I was at meetings. It was a very big part of my workplace culture. We used to joke about things when we were away on sales meetings and conferences, like 𝗏𝗏 and stuff, because it was just so much part of what we did. But that stigma was there. Stigma to, you know, if you weren't drinking, but also for me, when I, started to maybe be a bit concerned sometimes that how my drinking was making me feel, that stigma around a judgment of, maybe having an alcohol problem. So, and there was so much fear about my colleagues knowing that maybe, I was struggling a bit with alcohol. So there were all sorts of things tied in, but drinking was absolutely normalized. And you're right, Alex, to this day, there's sober shaming. There are lots of hurdles that people have to jump over if they're in a workplace that, where alcohol takes center stage and they're trying not to drink.
It's almost also, Susan, like you've got to justify why you're not drinking. So if you don't drink, is it because you've got a problem then? Is that why? Or can you not handle your drink? Actually, sometimes it's a choice.
Sometimes it's a choice. There are all sorts of reasons why people don't drink alcohol, but the assumptions are made, which is why when I'm giving my talks, I always tell people to be prepared for that, that pressure, that why aren't you drinking, even if you tell a little white lie, not that it's anyone's business. But yeah, there is absolutely pressure there still.
And there is pressure because I still see it where people go on nights out with each other, and there's still that egging on, there's still the drinking culture. And for me personally anyway, the whole UK culture used to be you drunk as much as you could, as quickly as you could. And that was, that's been a UK culture for a long time. And change isn't going to happen overnight, as we all know and as we all advocate. But what has started, you know, the seismic shift that is coming, and that has come already, is amazing. And, you know, I guess, James, you touched on before about neurodiversity and, you know, having to use it as a coping mechanism. I'd like you to just, I guess, you know, give us a bit more of an example as to that, because I think probably there is so many more people out there that use alcohol as a coping mechanism, whether it's having a bad day, I'll have a drink, whether it's having a good day, I'll have a drink, you know. But from a neurodiversity point of view, you know, how did it affect you? And, you know, talk to us a little bit.
Yeah, I think it kind of, when you're amongst it, you don't really notice it. Is the first thing, I think. And I've been going to the pub since I was about 14 years old, because that was the kind of culture that I went into in the mid-90s. It was kind of, you know, get down the pub as soon as you can, and then you've got your social network, and then you build from there, rather than build your social network and then perhaps go down the pub. It's go down the pub and discover your social network. And I think whilst I was in it, and amongst at the time, amongst a lot of other undiagnosed neurodiverse people who were all struggling with different substance abuse, not necessarily alcohol, but other things. Once you're amongst it, you don't really notice kind of what it's holding back and the effect it can have when you stop, which is where kind of, and it is not from a medical point of view, it's from a psychological point of view, is that it's a good way to kick the can down the road of, I'm feeling overwhelmed, so I'm going to have a glass of wine. And that's a perfectly social, or I'm going to have a pint of beer, or I'm going to have a cider, or perhaps have a whiskey on an evening. And that's a perfectly socially acceptable thing to do. What I found was the problem was when I decided to stop. And then all of the anxiety and all of the depressive episodes and everything like that I had been holding off through the use of alcohol suddenly just kind of come up and go, hi, we're here now. You've been kicking the can down the road, and the can is no longer kickable, so I'm going to collect my debt. And that's where the overwhelm can happen from my personal experience from as a neurodiverse person, is where the kind of the dam breaks, and it just kind of get everything happens all at once, and it gets incredibly noisy and very overwhelming. I've now, since I had a burnout last year at the end of August, I came back from holiday. I had kind of worked right up to my holiday, got to the end of it, got COVID, and then all of that suddenly just kind of came crashing down around me. And from that point on, I've stopped drinking. I've completely rewired my association with alcohol, is that alcohol is fine until it's not. And for me, it's kind of like, well, I'm not going to use that as a crutch anymore. I've reduced my how sociable I am from it, but I have a very low social battery. So why am I trying to kind of pump that up through other means? Because eventually that battery remains as low. You're still kind of bouncing along the bottom of being zero battery, but you're just kind of synthesizing the energy through use of alcohol. And that's just not a healthy way to be from a mental health point of view at all, particularly if you're neurodiverse, because all of those thoughts, all of that overthinking, all of that anxiety will come back and bite you on the bum. So for my personal choice, I've cut alcohol out of my life completely. I'm not saying I'm sober. I'm just saying alcohol's not part of my life anymore. It's not a kind of, I'm not making a monumental decision about it. I'm just kind of, I've cut it out and that's it. I'm not going to sit here and kind of demonize it, because I think that, you know, alcohol has, oiled the gears of many industries over the years, and it can be a great way to kind of deconstruct social barriers. I think it becomes a problem when you use it to cope with those social barriers.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. And I think it's probably only become more paramount and prevalent as to the effects it has on us over the last so many years. And, you know, it was always just an accepted thing that everybody drank, and that was that. And, you know, actually, the more that we as a nation have become amazing at looking after ourselves physically and eating healthily and looking after ourselves physically, and the next step is to be all brilliant at looking after ourselves mentally. And, you know, that is not using something else to basically push your problems down the road. You know, I did it. I can openly hold my hand up that I used alcohol to run away from everything, you know, to basically block everything out and run away from all of my problems. And, you know, that is not a healthy relationship with alcohol. And, you know, it's about finding what works for you in terms of your own mental health. And what I loved, James, was that you said, you know, you accept that you haven't got a high social battery, and that, you know, that's okay. That's okay to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge thing, is kind of self-acceptance and knowing your limits and perhaps using them to your advantage, and rather than seeing it as a, I think it's like the Alan Carr book about giving up smoking, is you're not giving something up, you're actually creating opportunity for more things to happen.
Exactly.
And for me, it's kind of like, you know, I will go out once or twice a week and I'll socialize, and that's enough for me. I am not a social butterfly. I find kind of large groups of people incredibly overwhelming. So, but now it's kind of like, previously I'd have gone, well, I'll just push through and I'll have another pint until I get to the point where all the noise stops. And now it's like, I'm just going to go home.
Yeah, and that's great. That's great, because what you're actually doing is you've got to look after yourself.
That's all fine as well. I'm not kind of here to kind of judge how other people deal with it, but for me, it's just the self-awareness of just going, I'm done. You know, I'm gonna politely step out of this. I'm finding it too much, and I'm not prepared to kind of put myself through the ringer anymore to tick the social norms.
Yeah, which is amazing. And Susan, I guess you've probably got more stats, more knowledge than any of us around alcohol and what it does to you. And, you know, I know bits that, you know, technically it's a depressant, you know, it certainly never makes you feel great in the morning, does it? Let's be honest, if you've drunk a lot, all of us who've drunk over the years, you don't jump out of bed and think to yourself, woohoo, it's the start of a new day, let's go. And it does build anxiety. You know, talk to us a little bit more about some of the effects.
I think, there are so many impacts. And if we're thinking about, you know, alcohol and the workplace that we're talking about, and because a lot of people who work drink, and some drink to cope with workplace stress. We know that I think it was YouGov did some work, and about 27% of people who were drinking more actually blamed workplace stress for that drinking, or that increase in drinking. But yeah, there's this sort of mutually negative impact. People, you know, drink for all sorts of reasons, whether it's coping with stress or having fun and stuff, but that can have an impact. You know, even moderate drinking have an impact on their performance in the workplace. And then if their workplace is if their work is suffering, then that can have an impact on their drinking on an evening. But those impacts, using alcohol for stress and things, it's something, it's a very vicious cycle to get into. And ultimately, like you said, things like anxiety can really increase. People often use alcohol because they're anxious. I know that I did. I thought there was something wrong with my life. And that was what was making me anxious, but I didn't realize it was because I was drinking more. So in the end, I was using alcohol to take away the anxiety that alcohol had caused. But yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of stats around alcohol. We know that over 10 million people are drinking more than is good for their mental and physical health. We know that, you know, that I think it's about 17 million sick days are caused by alcohol. And it's not people, sort of mainly people like me who are alcohol dependent. It's things like hangovers and presenteeism, turning up to work in body but not in mind, you know, just not functioning, firing on all cylinders. And then there's the ripple effect and the impact on colleagues having to pick up the slack. So we know that, you know, alcohol, it's not all about people being drunk at work or people being dependent. It has a huge impact on the workplace, on family life, and that's what happened to me. You know, it started maybe at work, drinking to be confident and stuff, but then things start to spill over into your life, and start impacting on you, and then you drink to take away the stresses of that, and you get into this vicious cycle. And I think that's one of the brilliant things that we do with the work that we do is busting those myths of, you know, around why people use alcohol to take away anxiety, to help them sleep, when it has the opposite effect to you know, thinking that they can drive the next day after they've had, you know, not understanding how alcohol is processed in the body. It has huge impacts that people just don't realize.
Yeah, it's the biggest one for me then, when you touched on the sleep. You know, anybody who thinks that drinking alcohol is gonna help their sleep and gonna, you know, make sure that they get a good night's sleep, it's absolutely ridiculous. You know, your REM sleep or whatever it is dreadful once you've had alcohol, and the consumption, it's just like you know, the sleep deprivation used to be used as a form of torture. You know, and effectively, if you're drinking, it's effectively like having a really, really, really bad night's sleep.
Yeah. And if that goes on for a long period of time, that in itself can impact on your mental health. So, you know, again, it's all of these unhealthy and very negative cycles that people can get into, and they don't realize it. You know, and this happens to people not deliberately, not, you know, not going out to do these things. These things happen because people don't realize.
Yeah, it's true. Alice, I think both of us are really passionate about prevention, not cure, because, you know, cure is, you know, incredibly difficult and so super hard, but the prevention, we can work together as a collective, as different companies, as different workforces, and we as individuals spend probably, I think it's something like 2/3 of our lives in work, you know. And, you know, I am a massive advocate of everything that you are doing with Ripple, and I think we're on a joined up mission, you know, to help people with prevention. You know, talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on prevention and what's driving you to do, you know, expand even further, and, you know, to be helping around alcohol, to be helping around other areas of mental health. Yeah, just give us a bit more of a...
Yeah, so Ripple has always been around self-harm and suicide and prevention in that space. And how it works is it's a piece of technology. It can be put onto computers, it can be put onto Wi-Fi. And it means that if somebody was to conduct a harmful search relating to that topic, Ripple would come up and signpost them to relevant support services. But over the last 4 years, we've worked with incredible people who have all had lived experience of a variety of different life challenges, conditions, issues that they've...
Hello? Susan, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Alex.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, guys. It looks like the heat wave might have caused Alice to have some technical issues, and she's currently frozen with us on the screen. So I am going to flip it to you, James, to talk about, you know, your views on prevention, because what I love about you, James, is that you've put your head above the parapet and said you're neurodivergent. You know, you used to do things one way and you are doing things a different way, and you wanted to share your own journey in the want and the wish to help other people, because that's how, you know, I think all of us have got the same mission, that we're not telling anybody what to do. We're just trying to use our own lived experience or what we've learned, what we've had to, you know, go through to find what actually works.
That's exactly it. And I think particularly from a neurodiverse community point of view is that you know, diversity is the key word. Is that everybody is different, everyone experiences the world in different ways, and everyone struggles with different things. Some people can thrive in certain environments, other people can completely kind of shut down and really struggle from a sensory point of view. And I think there's the biggest thing that I've learned trying to kind of decouple myself from the socially acceptable ways of coping, of kind of, you know, going to the pub, having a drink and that sort of thing, and also listening to myself more, because I think there can be, you know, there's a thousand influencers out there with the greatest hack possible for their ADHD or their autism. Might not work for you. It might do, but chances are it might not. And I think the biggest thing to do is listen to your own body. And where previously I would have kind of shut out the sense of feeling overwhelmed and perhaps just gone and had a pint or a glass of wine or something like that, is to actually listen to kind of what the cause of that overwhelm is, and what there is that I can do about it, or whether I just take myself out of the environment that might be causing it. So I think that kind of, you know, there's 1,000 books and 1,000 influencers and 1,000 LinkedIn posts about the greatest way that you can overcome the challenges of neurodivergence. I think that the listening needs to start with yourself and finding out what the triggers are that might be causing your need to kind of reach for a drink, and then working out how you can fix them. And I think there's kind of two taboos here, I suppose. That one, bizarrely, that sobriety is more of a taboo than alcohol, and also that neurodivergence isn't talked about enough, or kind of or the struggles of it. There's a lot of celebration around neurodivergence, which is fantastic, but I think that with that in hand, it has to come with the acceptance that there are a lot of people struggling out there, and people can't necessarily find the answers that they need. So I'm kind of trying, as you said, put my head above the parapet a little bit, and trying to kind of normalize the conversation, because then I think that it becomes a lot easier for other people to talk about it, or to put their hand up and say, hey, the same thing happened to me, or I experienced the same sort of overwhelm as you do, I tried this. Because it can be too easy to kind of start doom scrolling on social media, which in itself has its own mental health challenges, and not kind of sit down and kind of go, okay, I'm going to create the space around me of reducing disruption and listen to what I need myself, rather than being influenced into the change.
Yeah, James, and I love the fact that it all boils down to that you have learned to look after yourself and do what works for you.
Yeah.
And I've spent 5 months in different rehabs around the world, and I've spent 5 months of working on myself. And the most important thing is that I put myself first. I basically do what works for me. I basically look after myself mentally and physically, because if I don't do that, I'm no good to anybody. I'm no good to anybody. And everybody has that old perception that doing that, looking after yourself, is selfish. And actually it's not. Because if you don't look after yourself, you can't look after your children. If you don't look after yourself, you can't look after your parents. If you don't look after yourself, you can't look after your loved ones, friends, colleagues.
Someone I know who runs Talk Club, and their strategy is put your own oxygen mask on first. And it's a similar sort of approach, is that if you are useless, or you can't kind of look after yourself or prioritize yourself, or use selfishness for a positive action, you can't look after the people around you, like your kids or your family or loved ones who might need you to be there for them. But you have to be there for yourself first. You have to kind of get your ducks in a row first, and then you can start listening and being aware of what else is going on around you.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. And I'll be honest, I only realized something over the last week or so, that when I finally came into recovery and got my thing, I couldn't do it for myself, because I didn't know how to look after myself and prioritize myself. The only way I could do it and get it was to do it for my son, because it was easy for me to look after and do it for him, because it was looking after somebody else. I've now learned over the last few years that, yeah, I have to look after myself and I have to put myself first. But at that very first turning point, I had to do it for him. because it was easier for me to actually understand and put him first and look after him, because I didn't know how to look after myself. And that was a really powerful thing that I've actually only really just, you know, got my head around in the last sort of few months. But I think it's very prevalent to what we're talking about. Alice, I'm conscious that the heat wave just caused us to have technical issues. I don't know whether, have you got solar panels on your roof or something? Did it overheat?
I'm overheating, so there's a potential that could have happened as well. So yeah, a bit of both, I think.
So let's jump back, because we were mid-flow, in you giving us a little bit about, you know, Ripple, your prevention, your everything. So yeah, let's jump back.
Yeah, so we've recently expanded out into the world of alcohol, substance misuse, eating disorders, and so on. Not because we're experts in those areas, but because every single one of them comes with an increased risk of that person experiencing suicidal thoughts, and alcohol is no different to that. So what we're doing is we've built our technology, and if anybody goes on the internet and searches for something harmful to do with alcohol, such as how do I hide alcohol on my breath at work, Ripple would be presented, but it would signpost them to immediate support that they can access to get a grip of what it is they're going through, alcohol change being one of them. And we've worked with, you know, experts in the field with this. This is from advisory boards where we've got people who have got lived experience, people like James, who has helped guide us and advise us on the wording and who we should signpost to and so on. And it's going really well. And we're getting some huge organizations now that are actually saying, look, you know, we don't want Ripple self-harm and suicide tool. Actually, we also want the alcohol tool as well here. And we want to help as many people as possible upstream before it gets to the stage of self-harm and suicide. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. And what I love, it's the prevention piece for me, because I'm, you know, I got to the end of the road, and trying to help anybody once you get to the end of the road is the hardest thing that you can do. And what we can do as a collective is we can work on the prevention piece, prevention in the workplace, prevention, you know, in spreading the word, prevention in putting your head above the parapet, prevention in accepting that there is no stigma. If somebody's struggling mentally, if somebody's, you know, become reliant on alcohol and using it as a coping mechanism, that's okay. If they come and put their hands up and basically they need some support and some help, 100% that's okay. It's okay not to be okay all the time. And I think this is what gets me excited. This is what gets me out of bed in the morning, knowing that, you know, as a collective, you know, there's a lot of us coming together and spreading the word. And it's not for any other reason other than trying to help, inspire, you know, help other people, and show that there is another way, and show that, you know, you don't have to, you know, think that you can't talk.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, you know, I can relate to this personally as well, because as I said earlier, you know, my experience of alcohol, you know, up until kind of mid-20s, late 20s was very much a drinking culture at work. But when I lost my brother, Josh, to suicide, my relationship with alcohol changed into one of, well, I've got to have it to drown out the noise, to try and get me through each day. You know, I remember one day in particular was the day of the coroner's investigation for Josh. And there's a old wives' tale, isn't there, on the internet, that brandy's good for shock. And I just went for as much brandy as I could possibly have after that, and was in bed by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that was how I thought it was okay to cope with what I was going through. But actually, over the last, I would say probably 6 months or so, I've realized, as you said earlier, Alex, alcohol is actually a depressant, and I'm on medication to not be depressed. So actually, when I'm drinking, I'm counteracting what I'm taking every morning as my medication. So what am I doing?
Yeah.
So look, I don't not drink completely, but I'm definitely now more aware of the effects of it, and using it in the right ways, because trying to drink as much brandy as you possibly can in one afternoon is certainly not the way forward, having learnt firsthand.
Yeah, and you make such a good point that it's using it in the right ways. And if you can have a good relationship with alcohol, a balanced relationship with alcohol, then that's amazing. That's amazing. But if you are using alcohol to cope, you know, to basically run away, to basically, to James's point, to kick things down the road, you know, that's not a healthy relationship. You know, that's not a healthy relationship. And Susan, what would be, you know, some of your, you know, top tips or advice, you know, that you'd give to workforces, to, you know, anybody listening, you know, in terms of, you know, what your thoughts are, how we can get people speaking or just acknowledging, or, you know.
Well, getting back to what you were saying about prevention, that is exactly where we come from, and what is so important to me, because who knows, you know, years ago, if workplaces, especially who are ideally placed to do this, that were having conversations like this, opening up the conversation about alcohol, I might not have, you know, lost everything to alcohol. So it's so important to me to talk about prevention, and workplaces, I like to say, are ideally placed, and they should be, alcohol should be absolutely part of their well-being agenda. That's the first thing I would say. But looking at things like the culture around alcohol, not just opening up, creating a culture where people feel safe to come forward and comfortable to come forward if they need support, but also looking at that social culture as well, you know, where alcohol isn't taking center stage. We know that I think it's over 30% of employees avoid workplace socials where alcohol is going to be present. So
34%.
Yeah, organizations can be inadvertently making somebody choose between attending an event that they're not comfortable at, or just not attending and missing out. So addressing that culture, and it has to come from the top down. That's something I would say as well. But educating staff, training line managers to spot the signs, to have conversations, having a policy that encourages people to come forward rather than waiting for something to become a crisis before we do something. Just opening up this conversation about alcohol could really help so many people, in the same way that companies now, you know, mental health is, people talk about mental health and it's part of well-being, so alcohol should be on there as well. And the final point I'd just like to make on this is, you know, you might have a very valued employee who's just going through a tough time at the minute and doing all of the things that we've talked about, maybe turning to alcohol as a crutch to cope with things. So let's support them. Let's open up the conversation rather than waiting for it to become a crisis, or, you know, a disciplinary or whatever. I would say opening up the conversation is the most important thing you can do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. James, have you know, give me your take, your view, you know.
I think with my neurodivergent hat on, I think it's one of the things that can compound a lot of issues around, particularly, I mean, the statistics around suicidal ideation or considering suicide or attempting suicide amongst the neurodivergent community are huge. They're absolutely massive. And with females in particular, where autism and ADHD didn't used to be considered a diagnosable condition within females, the risk of suicide is much higher. If you then add the anxiety of the workplace and coping with substances and alcohol, on top of that, it creates a very big mental health problem. I think the idea of an intervention in the workplace can sometimes seem like a kind of a really big thing that needs kind of lots of processes and lots of kind of all hands on deck and people making kind of radical change. Intervention can just be as simple as asking if somebody's okay and starting that conversation. The additional thing around which is something I struggle with neurodivergence is something called alexithymia, which is I have trouble translating what my feelings are. If I know I'm having a positive feeling or if I'm having a negative feeling. I don't know if that positive feeling is joy, excitement, happiness, or my negative feeling is anger or fear or disgust or terror. I have real trouble kind of pinpointing those exact feelings and communicating them, which again can add itself into its own kind of struggle of having conversations with people, expressing how I'm feeling and getting frustrated that I can't express how I feel. So instead kind of, going into a bit of a hole about it, it's very easy to then fall into alcohol can solve that as well. So there's a lot of touch points across, which is where kind of the initiative that Ripple are having with the different touch points of alcohol abuse or substance abuse or former armed forces or eating disorders and that sort of thing. There's a layer across all of the top of that with neurodivergence, which can amplify a lot of those feelings, which can make people really struggle. If you then tie in alcohol abuse on top of that and suicidal ideation, and also the inability to kind of say I'm struggling or communicate exactly how you're feeling, you create a little bit of a kind of a mental health melting pot of risk. So I think for workplaces in particular, interventions need to be wide sweeping. They don't need to be dramatic kind of crack teams swooping in and whisking people out of the workplace to deal with them. It's as simple as a hand on the shoulder and asking if someone's okay, and kind of allowing them to communicate in a way that they feel comfortable with.
Yeah, that's super insightful. And I've never heard of that. I'm always honest enough to hold my hands up and say that I've just learned something. And it was thought provoking for me personally to think about, as in for somebody with neurodivergent, not being able to communicate whether it's, what type of feeling it is. That was really, really insightful. So thank you for sharing that, because that's not something that I'd appreciated or I'd thought about personally. So yeah, that was.
Yeah, and it's a strange thing. I'm kind of uncovering all of these weird Latin named conditions that I didn't realize I had. I don't get thirsty either, so I forget to drink water. And there's all these kind of weird quirks that are associated with it.
But you always remember to wash your beard though, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's much water as is needed for that. I just don't drink it in the process. But there's all of these different things, and these traits aren't specifically reserved to people who are neurodivergent. You can have alexithymia and not be neurodivergent, but they are things that need to be taken into account when thinking about inclusiveness in the workplace and awareness in the workplace around potential mental health issues or substance abuse.
Yeah. Alice, what sort of takeaways would you give to people? I know you're shining a light. For me, you're shining a light. You're basically, wanting to work on the prevention just like we are. Like all of us are. It's the prevention, isn't it? And leading from the front, being willing to lead from the front, be willing to sort of showcase and, lead from the front, because that's what we need. Because I truly believe that when we all first came into business, however many years ago, all we have done is basically been shown what that person who first came in 30, 40, 50 years ago had seen. And, it's basically change happens, but it has to happen from the top, doesn't it? The business leaders have to basically buy into, the change, why it needs to happen, why it's so important to be looking after ourselves mentally as well as physically. What would be your big advice or takeaways?
I would say there's three. So my first one naturally is please, if you're a workplace, deploy Ripple, because you just do not know what people might be going through and what they do search for. And yes, they do search for this stuff at work. I think the second thing is to normalize alcohol-free aspects. If you're doing a team day, if you're doing a team evening or an event, make sure there's alcohol-free options there. Clarity is a perfect example of some of the alcohol-free events that you can go to that are there, that don't prioritize alcohol and having to have a good time with alcohol all the time. And the third thing is a bit of a personal one, which is an app that I discovered, actually one of the Clarity events that Alcohol Change partner with, and it's called Try Dry. An amazing app that you can put on your phone, download it from the App Store, and you can track your sober days and how much you're drinking on certain days and so on. And actually sooner rather than later, you get to see a real picture of how alcohol impacts you, how it impacts your mood, how it impacts your productivity on a day-to-day basis and so on. And that's been really insightful for me. So I'd really recommend downloading that Try Dry app as well.
And it's free. And over 1 million downloads so far.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the most powerful thing, isn't it? That, take a step back. Everybody is basically wanting to help and giving so much back. Yes, businesses have to make money. Yes, charities have to cover the cost. Yes, everybody has to but there's an underlying want and wish within this community collective of people that are actually trying to make a difference, are actually trying to lead from the front, and it's one of the biggest reasons why I came out to all my corporate network about being an alcoholic, because you don't see many people shouting from the rooftops about being an alcoholic. It's not exactly a badge of honor. And for me, there was always that stigma that's still associated with, somebody on a park bench with a bottle of whiskey in a brown bag. And that's, as I grew up, that's what I considered to be an alcoholic. And ultimately, it doesn't discriminate. Alcohol and alcoholism does not discriminate. Addiction does not discriminate at all. Doctors, pilots, anybody and everybody, can have the same effects on. It does not discriminate. And it's about, accepting that all of us need to be looking after ourselves mentally, I think, and finding what works for us individually, but breaking down those barriers and the stigma is so powerful, and we can only do that together, can't we?
And that's why this is so important, that the fact that it can happen to anyone, and by doing things like this, we're breaking down those stereotypes and that stigma, and allowing people, that safety and that security to talk about alcohol, opening up that conversation. Sorry, Alice.
I was just going to say pretty much exactly what you've just said, Susan. I think it's events like this, conversations like this, that enable people to be more open about what they're going through. And even on the chat today, there's been some people that have very bravely shared their own experiences as well. So kudos to them too, and hopefully the conversations will continue.
Yeah, do you know what? And stuff like that inspires me. If other people are listening and are being brave enough to start speaking. I remember doing one of my first radio interviews, and the guy who was recording it came out and admitted that he was a gambling addict after he'd listened to my story. And I thought, wow, it's a big thing to be vulnerable and to put your head above the parapet. But if you can inspire somebody else, if you can make it a safe space for somebody else to basically be comfortable and be brave enough to share their own thing, the amount of support, help, and compassion they will get back is tenfold. And that is where things like this morning, I could literally chat to you guys all day, and I don't think we'd run out of things to say. I am mindful, as always, of the time. James, give me any takeaways from you, any bits that you think, any last few bits that you would like to use?
I think with the to kind of mirror some of what Alice was saying and Susan was saying, I came up through agency land in my career and advertising and design. And I think you would probably have a drink in your hand before you had a computer mouse in your hand when you started at a new agency. And it was kind of burn the candle at both ends and maybe start a fire in the middle as well, in terms of kind of work ethic and also drinking ethic as well. It would kind of, you'd have to go all in on it. And culturally, that change has to come from people that probably leaders now that grew up going through it, listening to probably the people coming into their company as young starters as to what they want the culture to be. Because I think there's too much of a danger of, well, if I stand in a room full of other managers who are a similar age and talk about alcohol awareness, it might get disregarded because the level of importance isn't as high in that room as it perhaps is at a culture, company-wide and industry-wide, of people getting started in that industry. So I think change does have to come from the top, but you have to take a holistic approach to who you're listening to.
I love that. I think that's super poignant and super powerful. So we've got a couple of minutes left. Susan, Alice, would you like to cover anything else off before we run out of time? Because otherwise I'm conscious that I will just end up waffling on.
I was just going to add as well, these days, we've got the added layer of challenge with so many more people working from home as well. And it can be quite isolating. When pubs and restaurants closed in lockdown, even though it's a long time ago, there was a whole group of people who have never dreamed of sitting at home drinking, who then started drinking at home. And for some, that habit stuck. And then working from home with late, not having to get up early, it brings a whole load of more challenges for people, and that it blurs the lines between stopping work and starting the evening. So some people use a drink to sort of signify a finished work and it's the start of the evening. So a whole load of new challenges for the workplace, for people being isolated. So it's so important now more than ever, I think, that workplaces are talking about this, opening up the conversation, training line managers to be that like James was talking about, that sensitive person that people can talk to in a non-judgmental way, and who can confidently signpost them to resources and things like Alcohol Change UK or things like that. So yeah, it's more important now more than ever because of working from home and the challenges that brings too.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Alice, would you like to finish with anything as you had your solar panel issue? I'm going to give you the last couple of minutes. I don't want. Hopefully, you've cooled down a bit now. Hopefully, you've cooled down after melting.
Well, yeah, a little bit, maybe a little bit. I think I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of our advisory board members at Ripple who have helped us to expand out into the world of alcohol misuse and our work in preventing that from happening, because without them we wouldn't be able to do it. So a huge thank you to them. And I think the only final thing for me to say is it's a very hot day in the UK today, and lots of us later after work will be thinking, oh, sit out in the garden, have a nice cold pint. Try Big Drop as your pint, maybe, because it's very refreshing and you won't have the hangover in the morning. So give it a try, see how you go. And the non-alcoholic beer range has really come on leaps and bounds over the last few years. So it's always worth a go.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I would just like to thank the three of you for this morning. This afternoon now, I can never remember my time. I forget my name sometimes. So yeah, this afternoon, this morning, whichever it is. Yes,
sorry, can I just jump in and say, Alice, check is in the post. Thank you very much. And also a couple of people, and they've just said they'd like to connect with me on the chat on LinkedIn. By all means, feel free to reach out and I'll connect with you, and I'll give you my email address because I'm rarely on LinkedIn because it drives me absolutely bonkers. But please do reach out and connect with me. And just a final comment that someone said on the end about one day at a time. It is one day at a time, and I think from a neurodivergent person's point of view, or my impatience of fixing things has to be done immediately. And I think that if things need to be properly fixed, they won't be fixed overnight. So it is taking the time and having the self-care and the self-awareness and being patient with yourself, because you can't, years and years of conditioning into certain mindsets can't be stopped overnight. You have to you've got to stick with it, you've got to persevere, and you've got to be honest with yourself about it. But I just want to finish on that because I think it can be I'm going to try it and it didn't work and I give up. You've got to keep at it.
Yeah. And Alex, could I just give 𝗪𝗀𝗁𝗂𝗀𝗧's website address for that dry app and all of our training? It's 𝗪𝗀𝗁𝗂𝗀𝗍.org.uk. Or if you go on the dry app, all of the resources for alcohol awareness week as well for workplaces.
Yeah, amazing. And yeah, as a collective, we can only help each other, and that's the most important thing. And a big thank you to all three of you for your time this morning, for hopefully inspiring some other people, for hopefully allowing some other people to have some thoughts around it all, to step back and to think about, as businesses, are we doing everything we could? Is there something we can do differently? Maybe we can look at, some different stuff. Maybe we can think about some different stuff, and maybe we can actually, get the staff involved, because I actually will speak to my staff and say, you tell me, guys, you tell me what do you guys think? Because I don't know all the answers. I haven't got every single answer, and I have to be willing to listen, learn, and adapt and change, and that's okay. That's okay. So go and enjoy the rest of the sun. Alice, hopefully you'll have no more internet problems from the heat wave. It's been an absolute pleasure. We could have chatted all day. If anybody wants to reach out to any of us individually, any of us collectively, all our contact details are available. And I'd just like to say a big thank you. So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks.